are listening to Texas History Lessons, a slow walk through Texas history made in Texas by a Texan for everyone, everywhere.
Welcome to Texas History Lessons. I'm Michael, and let's continue our look into 1836 and this experiment in perspective and context. As I said in part one, in 1836, George Washington had only been in his grave for 37 years, and John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, they'd only been dead for 10 years. They both passed away on July 4th, 1826. In 1836, Emily Dickinson was 6 years old. She lived in Massachusetts and would pen many wonderful lines in her future, including, "Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the tune without the words and never stops at all. And to live is so startling it leaves little time for anything else." Now, some say that you can sing all of Emily Dickinson's poems to the melody of the Yellow Rose of Texas. In 1836, Sitting Bull was possibly about the same age as Emily Dickinson, having been born on the Yellowstone River, we think possibly in 1836 or as early as 1831. Now, a year before 1836, Mirabeau Lamar had decided to follow James W. Fannin Jr. to Texas, following 2 election defeats in Georgia. The second had been on a platform for nullification. The plan had been that he would visit Texas to collect historical data. He was an aspiring writer and historian. Instead, he decided to return to Georgia and prepare to move to live in Mexican Texas. After hearing news of the fall of the Alamo and Fannin's death at Goliad, Lamar rushed back and arrived in time to fight at San Jacinto. Alexis de Tocqueville published the first volume of Democracy in America in 1835. In it, he wrote, "The case of Texas is still more striking. The state of Texas is a part of Mexico and lies upon the frontier between that country and the United States. In the course of the last few years, the Anglo-Americans have penetrated into this province, which is still thinly peopled. They purchase land, they produce the commodities of the country, and supplant the original population. It may easily be foreseen that if Mexico takes no steps to check this change, the province of Texas will very shortly cease to belong to that government." Now, he also had this to say, "The lands of the New World belong to the first occupant, and they are the natural reward of the swiftest pioneer. Even the countries which are already peopled will have some difficulty in securing themselves from this invasion. I have already alluded to what is taking place in the province of Texas. The inhabitants of the United States are perpetually migrating to Texas, where they purchase land, and although they conform to the laws of the country, they are gradually founding the empire of their own language and their own manners. The province of Texas is still part of the Mexican dominions, but it will soon contain no Mexicans. The same thing has occurred whenever the Anglo-Americans have come into contact with populations of different origin." James Madison, credited by some as author of the Constitution, saw 1836 arrive and departed in June, while Aaron Burr, the slayer of Alexander Hamilton, defender of the Constitution and right hand to Washington, lived on, succumbing to death in September 1836. In 1836, 26-year-old Charles Darwin was sailing on the Beagle while David Crockett rode from Tennessee to Texas. Crockett arrived on January 5th, 1836. Darwin arrived at Sydney, Australia on January the 12th. Darwin would live another 46 years. Crockett only lasted a few weeks. Mexico in 1836 had a population of about 7 million people, according to one source, and the population of the United States was growing steadily to about 17 million by that year. According to an estimate made in 1836 in August, there were about 50,000 to 60,000 people residing within Texas between the Nueces and the Sabine Rivers. The majority of 30,000 Anglos and 5,000 African Americans lived on the Brazos, Colorado, and Trinity Rivers. There were about 3,500 native Mexicans, Tejanos, in Texas. About 800 lived at Natchitoches, 2,000 at San Antonio de Bayar, 120 at Victoria, 50 at San Patricio, and 500 at La Bahia, or Goliad. The estimate of 50,000 to 60,000 people living in Texas also includes 12,000 Native Americans, Wacos living on the headwaters of the upper Brazos, Tawakanese, Tonkawas, living between the Colorado River and La Bahia, or Goliad, Coushattes near the Trinity River, Alabama's on the Neches, and about 500 Caddos on the Trinity. The majority of the 12,000 included an estimated 8,000 Comanches, ranging from the Guadalupe Mountains and up into the southern plains, along with about 900 Lipans on the upper Colorado and north of Behar. It does not include the tribes that had come from the United States, which included 2,000 more men of fighting age or warriors. These were the Cherokees, Kickapoos, Choctaws, Chickasaws, Potawatomis, Delawares, and Shawnees. These latter were claimed to be the reason for General Gaines being stationed across the Sabine to observe and keep them in check, based on the way the source, which was Jackson's letter to Congress regarding Texas' estimated population. With 2,000 warriors, their total population might have been from 8,000 to 10,000 or more. This would increase the total population of Texas to about 60,000. Normally, you hear that the population of Texas is about 30,000, but when you include these other peoples, it does change things quite a bit in the way you look at how the state was populated. John Stuart Mill published State of Society in America in 1836. In this work, he wrote the following: omitting former ages, there are in the present age 4 great nations, England, France, Germany, and the United States. Each of these possesses, either in its social condition, in its national character, or in both, some points of indisputable and preeminent superiority over all the others. Each again has some deep-seated and grievous defects from which the others are comparatively exempt. The state of society in each and the type of human nature which it exhibits are subjects of most instructive study to the others, and whoever in the present age makes up his system of opinions from the contemplation of only one of them is in imminent danger of falling into narrow and one-sided views. Now, that's a very good thing to keep in mind. And he also added that the country's greatest defects of the United States were slavery, which he called the dark spot in the character and destiny of the Americans, and the American direful prejudice against people of color. At the beginning of 1836, Frederick Douglass made a New Year's resolution to gain his liberty from being enslaved. Among his many great words were these lines: "It is not light that we need, but fire. It is not the gentle shower, but thunder. We need the storm, the whirlwind, and the earthquake." And he also wrote, "Where justice is denied, where poverty is enforced, where ignorance prevails, and where any one class is made to feel that society is an organized conspiracy to oppress, rob, and degrade them, neither persons nor property will be safe." Wise words from a long time ago that are very applicable today. Kit Carson, the famous frontiersman, was in his 27th year of life on this planet, and he was more than likely up working in the fur trade with Jim Bridger, always ready to face off with the Blackfeet. He visited Fort Hall before going to Rendezvous in 1836, unaware that the future held many things for him in the American Southwest. Edgar Allan Poe was still at the beginning of his literary career with masterpieces yet to come, and in his 26th year, West Point graduate Henderson King Yoakum served in 1836 as a captain of mounted militia under General Edmund P. Gaines near the Sabine. Yoakum graduated from West Point in 1832, where Edgar Allan Poe had also attended in 1830 and 31. As commander of the Southwest Military Division of the United States, Gaines was standing watch over the military actions in Texas as the Texian and Mexican forces moved closer to the border. Yoakum would become friends with Houston and wrote the first scholarly history of Texas. His work aided in establishing Houston's reputation in history, despite great criticism from Houston's enemies. Yoakum was basically the Bancroft of Texas history. It's interesting to think that Yoakum, Edgar Allan Poe, and Fannin might have at one time crossed paths. The Cincinnati publisher Truman and Smith began publishing William Holmes McGuffey's Readers in 1836. The textbooks containing stories, poems, essays, and speeches helped create the first mass-educated and mass-literate generation in the world, which are things and qualities that we need to continue focusing on. Charles Goodnight, who would grow up to be one of the best-known Texas cattlemen and a basis for characters in Larry McMurtry's Lonesome Dove books, was born in Illinois on March 5th, 1836. Edouard Manet, the French modernist painter, was only 4 years old in 1836, and he would grow up to create many wonderful paintings and leave this wonderful thought: it is not enough to know your craft. You have to have feeling. Science is all very well, but for us, imagination is worth far more. Camille Pissarro, the Impressionist and Post-Impressionist painter, like Emily Dickinson and possibly Sitting Bull, was 6 years old in 1836. He said many years later, "Blessed are they who see beautiful things in humble places where other people see nothing." He, along with Claude Monet and others, would organize the first Impressionist exhibition in 1874. The art of the Impressionists had a significant influence on the work of Julian Onderdonk, who was a major Texas artist and whose father, Robert Jenkins Onderdonk, painted one of the best-known depictions of the events of 1836, including the fall of the Alamo. Mary Ann Evans, who published literary masterpieces like Middlemarch under the pseudonym George Eliot, was 7 years old in 1836. And I can't help but share some lines from her masterwork that kind of summarize the intent of this essay and experiment. Quote, "It is a narrow mind which cannot look at a subject from various points of view." Now, the novel also contains a couple of passages that apply personally to me. I have been using up my eyesight on old characters lately. The fact is, I want a reader for my evenings, but I am fastidious in voices, and I cannot endure listening to an imperfect reader. It is a misfortune in some senses. I feed too much on the inward sources. I live too much with the dead. My mind is something like the ghost of an ancient wandering about the world and trying mentally to construct it as it used to be, in spite of ruin and confusing changes. But I find it necessary to use the utmost caution about my eyesight. In another line, to reconstruct a past world, doubtless with a view to the highest purposes of truth. What a work to be in any way present at, to assist in, though only as a lamp holder. Buffalo Hump, who, if you're familiar with the works of Larry McMurtry, is a character he fictionalized, was also a real person. And Buffalo Hump, a war chief of the Pennateca Comanches, was about 36 years old in 1836. The year before, he and Yellow Wolf had led about 300 warriors in an attack on Parral in Chihuahua. The name Buffalo Hump was a much cleaner version of his name's more explicit meaning, which you can look up elsewhere. John James Audubon was nearing the end of publishing his series of books titled The Birds of America, and he would arrive in Texas in January 1837, and I've heard about he having visited the battlefield of San Jacinto. The great master of literature, Leo Tolstoy, was only 8 years old in 1836, and the famous Native American leader Geronimo, well, he was 7 years old, and he was recorded to have later said, "We are vanishing from the earth, yet I cannot think we are useless, or else Usen would not have created us. He created all tribes of men, and certainly had a righteous purpose in creating each." Sojourner Truth was in the 39th year of her life and in the 10th year of her freedom in 1836. Among the wisdom she shared was this: life is a hard battle anyway. If we laugh and sing a little as we fight, the good fight of freedom, it makes it all go easier. I will not allow my life's light to be determined by the darkness around me. Good words to carry with us. Iron Jacket, the father of Peta Nocona and grandfather of Quanah Parker, was about 46 years old in 1836. His son, Peta, would have been about 16, and Peta's future wife and the mother of Quanah was 9 years old and would be ripped from her family at Fort Parker on May 19, 1836. Alexander Dumas was 12 years old in 1836, and he would grow up to create The Count of Monte Cristo, The Three Musketeers, and many other literary works that have had effect on our culture. Fyodor Dostoevsky, who would become a masterful creator of Russian literature, was 15 years old that year. Washington Irving was well established in his literary career and published Astoria, a work of history, in 1836. Ten Bears, the principal chief of the Yamparica band of Comanches, was about 46 years old, a contemporary of Iron Jacket. It is said that he had been orphaned as a baby when Lakota warriors murdered his family. Oral history shares that when he grew up, he led horse-mounted spear attacks on Lakota villages in retaliation. And that bit of information was interesting to me because I always wondered about contact between and interaction between Comanches and Lakotas. A young 15-year-old Walt Whitman was trying to find work in 1836 and had yet to begin the poetic career that would drive him for decades. In Leaves of Grass, Whitman would write of Texas and the deaths at Goliad. Now I tell what I knew in Texas in my early youth. I tell not the fall of Alamo. Not one escaped to tell the fall of Alamo. The 150 are dumb yet at Alamo. 'Tis the tale of the murder in cold blood of 412 young men. Retreating, they had formed in a hollow square with their baggage for breastworks. 900 lives out of the surrounding enemies, 9 times their number, was the price they took in advance. Their colonel was wounded and their ammunition gone. They treated for an honorable capitulation, received writing and seal, gave up their arms, and marched back prisoners of war. They were the glory of the race of rangers, matchless with horse, rifle, song, supper, courtship, large, turbulent, generous, handsome, proud, and affectionate, bearded, sunburnt, dressed in the free costume of hunters, not a single one over 30 years of age. The first day morning, they were brought out in squads and massacred. It was beautiful early summer. The work commenced about 5 o'clock and was over by 8. None obeyed the command to kneel. Some made a mad and helpless rush. Some stood stark and straight. A few fell at once, shot in the temple or heart. The living and dead lay together. The maimed and mangled dug in the dirt. The newcomers saw them there. Some half-killed attempted to crawl away. These were dispatched with bayonets or battered with the blunts of muskets. A youth not 17 years old seized his assassin till 2 more came to release him. The 3 were all torn and covered with the boy's blood. At 11 o'clock began the burning of the bodies. That is the tale of the murder of the 412 young men. And it's interesting to think about how years after hearing about this while he was growing up, he chose this to, well, not necessarily 100% accurate. He chose this as something he wanted to include in his masterpiece of poetry. Frédéric Chopin, the Polish composer, was 26 years old and busy working on his musical etudes along with other masterworks. Herman Melville was 17 years old in 1836, and he would go to sea 3 years later and publish Moby Dick 15 years later. Stephen Foster, considered by some to be the father of American music, was 10 years old, and in 1836, Andrew Jackson was president of the United States. His parents were Scots-Irish colonists that had immigrated from Ulster, Ireland in 1765, the same year that Isaac Barr, a member of the British House of Commons and a veteran of the French and Indian War in the British American colonies, had coined the term Sons of Liberty in rebuttal to a derisive description of the American colonists during the introduction of the proposed Stamp Act. 1765 was also the year that Charles Mason and Jeremiah Dixon began the 2.5-year process of plotting the boundary between Pennsylvania and Maryland, the Mason-Dixon line, that would be the boundary for the United States North and South. In 1836, Benjamin Harrison, who would be the 23rd president of the United States and who was grandson of William Henry Harrison, the brief 9th president of the United States in 1841, he would celebrate his 3rd birthday in August 1836. Now, he had an uncle also named Benjamin. Benjamin Harrison, the uncle, was in Texas in 1836. He was a mysterious and controversial man, and he was captured that year by Mexican General Jose de Urrea in April 1836 and sent as an emissary of goodwill to the Texas colonists. J.M.W. Turner and Thomas Cole were active and painting masterpieces in the 1830s. Robert E. Lee celebrated his 29th birthday in 1836 and received a promotion to the rank of first lieutenant in the United States Army while serving as an assistant in the chief engineer's office in Washington, D.C. Harriet Beecher Stowe, author of Uncle Tom's Cabin, was 25 and living in Ohio in 1836, where, as in the appendix it explains, she, quote, lived many years in Ohio on the confines of a slave state, and thus had been made familiar with facts and occurrences in relation to the institution of American slavery. Some of the most harrowing incidents related in the story had come to her knowledge from time to time in conversation with former slaves, now free in Ohio. Ulysses S. Grant was 16 years old in 1836, and he became a student that year at Maysville Seminary in Kentucky. I'll need to look up and see how close Maysville is to where Sidney Sherman came from in Kentucky. Princess Alexandria Victoria of Kent was 17 years old in 1836, and she went on the next year in 1837 to become Queen Victoria of the United Kingdom. In 1836, the painter Thomas Cole, who I just mentioned, wrote his essay on America Scenery, which shared his artistic and environmentalist concerns. He's an amazing painter, and he said, "It would seem unnecessary to those who can see and feel for me to expatiate on the loveliness of verdant fields, the sublimity of lofty mountains, or the varied magnificence of the sky, but that the number of those who seek enjoyment in such sources is comparatively small. From the indifference with which the multitude regard the beauties of nature, it might be inferred that she had been unnecessarily lavish in adorning this world for beings who take no pleasure in its adornment." Susan B. Anthony, the co-founder of the National Woman Suffrage Association with Elizabeth Cady Stanton, was 7 years old in 1836. Stanton was 11. Henry David Thoreau was near the end of his studies at Harvard College, and Ralph Waldo Emerson, who's associated with Thoreau, published his essay Nature, which formulated and expressed the philosophy of transcendentalism. It began with these words: "To go into solitude, a man needs to retire as much from his chamber as from society. I am not solitary whilst I read and write, though nobody is with me. But if a man would be alone, let him look at the stars. The rays that come from those heavenly worlds will separate between him and what he touches. One might think the atmosphere was made transparent with this design to give man in the heavenly bodies the perpetual presence of the sublime. Seen in the streets of cities, how great they are. If the stars should appear one night in 1,000 years, how would men believe and adore and preserve for many generations the remembrance of the city of God, which had been shown?" And it's interesting to keep in mind that this was just 3 years after the Leonids did fall. Karl Marx was a serious 18-year-old student in the University of Berlin, and in 1836, he also became engaged to Jenny von Westphalen. Abraham Lincoln was 27 years old in 1836, the year that he was admitted to the Illinois bar to practice as a lawyer, and he was already in the middle of his 4 terms in the Illinois House of Representatives for Sangamon County. The next year, he would declare, "The institution of slavery is founded on both injustice and bad policy, but the promulgation of abolition doctrines tends rather to increase than abate its evils." And as we know, he would have a great deal to do with the abatement of the evils of slavery in the future. Harriet Tubman was about 14 to 16 years old and still enslaved, living in Maryland. Warren D.C. Hall, not necessarily somebody you might have heard about, but I intend to let you become more aware of him in the future, Warren D.C. Hall had been a member of the Republican Army of the North, and he was back in Texas in 1829 and became active in colonial affairs. And President David G. Burnet, who had adventured widely, and his adventures had led him to Texas also, made Hall Adjutant General in 1836 of the Texas Army, and then became Secretary of War when Thomas Jefferson Rusk left to go serve with Houston and the Army, and was present at San Jacinto. On February 8, 1836, the first railway in London, England, began operation. A few days later, on February 25, 1836, Samuel Colt received a U.S. patent for the Colt revolver. March 29, 1836 was the date of the first performance of 23-year-old Richard Wagner's opera Das Liebesverbot. It was a failure, unfortunately for him. Charles Dickens began publishing the Pickwick Papers in March 1836. The first line reads, "The first ray of light which illumines the gloom and converts into a dazzling brilliancy that obscurity in which the earlier history of the public career of the immortal Pickwick would appear to be involved, is derived from the perusal of the following entry in the Transactions of the Pickwick Club, which the editor of these papers feels the highest pleasure in laying before his readers, as a proof of the careful attention, indefatigable assiduity, and nice discrimination with which his search among the multifarious documents confided to him has been conducted." If you want to hear more of that, go find yourself a copy of the Pickwick Papers, or go read Great Expectations. Alexander Twilight was elected to the Vermont House of Representatives in 1836, making him the first African-American elected to public office. Jose Joaquin de Arredondo y Meño, who Santa Anna had served under in crushing the Republican Army of the North in 1813 at the Battle of Medina, the bloody, bloody Battle of Medina. Well, he was in retirement in Cuba and would die the next year in 1837. And it's interesting to remember that it was Arredondo who had led that bloody attack against Texas rebels in 1813. It was Arredondo that had given Moses Austin Spanish authorization to settle in Texas, which ultimately led to his junior officer Santa Anna returning in 1836 to try to reenact Arredondo's victories against the Republican Army of the North. On March 2nd, 1836, the day the Texans declared independence, Sam Houston celebrated his 43rd birthday. Now, it's interesting to keep in mind that he was not necessarily anyone's hero in 1836. He'd had a promising career, but he'd lost everything. After serving under Jackson in the War of 1812 and getting injured seriously there, he'd resigned from the Army in 1818. He'd become a lawyer. Then he became district attorney for Nashville, followed by becoming Tennessee's representative in Congress for the 9th District in 1823. As a congressman, he had spoken out in support of recognizing the country of Greece and supporting its war of independence against the Ottoman Empire. As mentioned previously, Lord Byron had been there helping the Greeks fight for independence, as had been a young Kentuckian, John Melville Allen, who was present at Byron's death and would be there in 1836 in Texas and become the mayor of Galveston in 1839. Supported by Andrew Jackson, Houston had been elected Tennessee's 6th governor in 1827. At this point in time, everything had seemed possible for Houston, and there were some who saw the White House as his residence in the future. Then, after his wife left him because she loved another, everything fell apart. He resigned the presidency and returned to live with the Cherokees. De Tocqueville had met Sam Houston in his travels across the United States in December of 1831. Houston at that time was 38 years old, and de Tocqueville was 26. The young French writer described Houston with the following words: "His figure is athletic. Everything about him indicates physical and moral energy." He then described Houston's recent fall from power and added, "Since then, he has lived in the midst of the wilderness, half European, half savage." He then interviewed Houston with a series of questions that I will share at a later date. And then in 1832, he beat a United States congressman severely with a cane. He defended himself in Congress, and he then crossed into Texas in December 1832, and it would be in Texas that he changed his life and returned to public life. His reputation was not that of an esteemed great leader with an unimpeachable character. He was not that. But he had a character and a keen intellect that won loyalty. He had a forceful demeanor, strict commitment to his principles, overwhelmingly powerful protectiveness of his sense of honor, fierce loyalty to the Union, along with a less than perfect reputation, tendencies to be morose and lapse into despair, a habit of damaging profanity, and a lack of control with alcohol that made people doubt his ability to lead and gain trust. Yet there were people who were fiercely supportive in their belief in him and his abilities, and there were people who were dedicated to promoting him as the correct person to follow because of his many talents and strengths. He was equally dismissed and opposed by many others that could not see past his weaknesses, flaws, and tendency to be abrasive and insulting. His strange affinity and protectiveness of Native Americans in the eyes of people living at that time, and his desire to promote their rights caused many to doubt him. Sam Houston was many things, but he was not normal for the time and place in which he lived. In a word, he was a politician that would fit in quite well today. But there were a few in 1836 who would believe him worthy of the honor of the largest statue in the world of an American hero. Sam Houston was a lot of different things to a lot of different people, but above all, he was a good learner and a politician that had learned a lot from his mentor, Andrew Jackson. And like Old Hickory did with the Battle of New Orleans, old Sam Jacinto would milk everything he could for his political benefit for the rest of his life. And a lot of people didn't necessarily think he deserved credit for it. Also, after the fall of the Alamo in 1836, the earliest machinations for converting current events into the myth and mystique of Texas kicked into high gear. People didn't waste time with these matters. The dead defenders of the Alamo were quickly transformed into symbols of Texas heroism using religious and mythic terms. The March 24th, 1836 edition of the Telegraph and Texas Register shared an honorarium to them that is basically laser etched into Texas memory. And it read, "Honors and rest are with ye. The spark of immortality which animated your forms shall brighten into a flame. And Texas, the whole world, shall hail ye like demigods of old, as founders of new actions, and as patterns of imitation." A couple of days later, the citizens of Natchitoches passed a resolution calling the Alamo defenders martyrs to liberty and established the comparison of them with the 300 martyr warriors of Sparta who died defending Greece from the Persian invasion in 380 BC. The Natchitochians declared Thermopylae is no longer without parallel. Travis and his companions will be named in rivalry with Leonidas and his Spartan band. Now, declarations of the Alamo as the modern Thermopylae became so common that one person observed that, quote, "It almost seems a law that each novel, drama, or poem must contain its own." But a man named William Fairfax Gray had a different opinion. He was a lawyer, he was a politician, he was a land speculator, and he was a diarist. And he was disgusted that the Texians and Houston had not reinforced the Alamo. He would have nothing to do with the Alamo Thermopylae martyr comparison. And he declared, "Texas will take honor to herself for the defense of the Alamo, and will call it a second Thermopylae, but it will be an everlasting monument of national disgrace." You probably never heard that opinion from that time. And so with that, this version of my little experiment in context and perspective of 1836 and the years leading up to it is going to kind of draw to a close here. The world was changing in 1836, and the world was staying the same. Paracelsus, a Swiss physician, alchemist, lay theologian, and philosopher, who was born way back a year after Columbus's 1492 voyage, wrote, Time is a brisk wind. For each hour it brings something new. Change and continuity exist side by side in our present day and in the study of the past. And like Bill Gates said, we always overestimate the change that will occur in the next 2 years and underestimate the change that will occur in the next 10. It was the age of revolution. It was the age of Jackson. It was the birth of the modern age. These are phrases applied to the years leading up to 1836. And for the people living in those years, it was the present day, and they were living in a foreign world in a way from our world. Yet at the same time, it was our world. It was the foundation of our current world. The episode is not intended to be a complete picture. A lot of it doesn't necessarily make sense why I threw some things in there, and that's okay. There are many significant events that are missing. It was intended to be a short filler episode to give me time to finish research and writing the episode on the aftermath of San Jacinto. But it kind of got carried away, and it's grown into something else that if you feel like contributing, please, you can write to me at texashistorylessons@gmail.com. And with that said, I hope it was worthwhile and gave you some perspective. Just knowing that certain people were walking around on this earth at the same time as these events were happening, instead of focusing so laser focused on the events that we are sometimes. It's fulfilling to me, and that's why I thought I'd try to share it, and I will try to develop it into something else in the future. Essentially, what I've done here is let you look over my shoulder as I try to extricate my mind from a narrow view of the history of Texas into something broader. And a better way of saying it is, this is a look inside my brain as I try to develop understanding and meaning in studying the history. It's just the raw notes that I'm grabbing from everywhere, trying to process in my head and then make sense of in the future. But you just get the rough draft here. And as I said earlier, it's important, I think, because the events in Texas did not happen in a vacuum. The period of years before 1836, especially from the time of the establishment of the United States as a country, and after that time, are a fascinating group of years that are sometimes, seems like they're not given that much attention. We usually focus on founding era, and then Civil War, and then we move on. But it is a fascinating group of years that's extremely important to understand what was happening, and Texas was right in the heart of it. And Paul Johnson, in his book, The Birth of the Modern, focuses on the years 1815 to 1830. And in the preface, he expertly summarizes why this period is important. And that book kind of serves as an inspiration to what I was trying to do here and what I'm trying to do in the future. And this is part of what he has to say about the years following the Napoleonic Wars, the wars that were tangentially including the War of 1812 and the Mexican struggle for independence. He wrote, "The United States transformed itself from a struggling ex-colony into a formidable nation, growing fast in territory and population and embracing democratic politics. Russia, too, was expanding fast and at the same time was developing the fatal fissures in her society which were to engulf her in the immense tragedies of the 20th century. In China and Japan, also the seeds of future catastrophes were being sown. Latin America came into independent and troubled existence, and the first stirring of modernity were felt in Turkey and Egypt, Southeast Asia, the Middle East, and the Balkans. In India, the British were moving deeper into the subcontinent and beginning to modernize it. They were breaking out of their coastal enclaves in South Africa and Australia and striking inland. All over the world, the last wildernesses in the Pampas and the steppes in the Mississippi Valley and Canada, in the Himalayas and the Andes, were being penetrated or settled by the advanced societies, and their peoples were being subdued, in some cases annihilated. Never before or since had so much cheap land become available, and the hungry peoples of Europe were moving overseas in vast numbers to possess it. These political, economic, and demographic changes, all without precedent in their scale and future significance, were accompanied by powerful new currents in music, in painting, literature, and philosophy, some ennobling and refreshing, some sinister." He went on to say, "The age abounded in great personalities. warriors, statesmen, and tyrants, outstanding inventors and technologists, and writers, artists, and musicians of the highest genius, women as well as men. I've brought them to the fore, but I have also sought to paint in the background, showing how ordinary men and women and children lived, suffered and died, ate and drank, worked, played, and traveled. And I have something to say about animals too, especially those noble creatures, the horse and the dog, and the exotic beasts that were now filling the new zoos. And if that's not an inspiration for you to go pick up that book, I hope you consider looking into it, because it is a massive work, an impressive work, and a good work. He also has another book called Modern Times, which is worthy of your attention. And yes, The Birth of the Modern is about the setup to that big work. And Johnson's goal in his book is similar to my personal goal. Much of what he wrote applies, of course, to the history of the Lone Star State. So the plan is dream big, work hard, fail again, fail better. And I'm not audacious enough to say that I can do better than the amazing work others have done and are doing. That's not me. But I believe it's worth a try. And in the attempt, I hope to do a little good in my efforts. And I hope maybe to inspire some young people to someday in the future take on everything and try to do something even more magnificent. Dream big, work hard, fail better. And even if I don't accomplish the impossible idea I have in my head, that's okay. As long as we keep moving forward, that's what matters, I think. And what drives me best is illustrated by some quotes that I shared before at other times from James Baldwin, and I believe in these words. First, for history, as nearly no one seems to know, is not merely something to be read, and it does not refer merely or even principally to the past. On the contrary, the great force of history comes from the fact that we carry it within us, are unconsciously controlled by it in many ways, and history is literally present in all that we do. It could scarcely be otherwise, since it is to history that we owe our frames of reference, our identities, and our aspirations. And another favorite quote by James Baldwin on history is, American history is longer, larger, more various, more beautiful, and more terrible than anything anyone has ever said about it. And I think that's true about the history of the world and everything we attempt. Beautiful, terrible, and amazing. And I can't really say anything better than that to end. So this is the end.
I can say to my new Samsung Galaxy S25 Ultra, hey, find a keto-friendly restaurant nearby and text it to Beth and Steve. And it does, without me lifting a finger. So I can get in more squats anywhere I can. 1, 2, 3.
Will that be cash or credit?
Credit. 4.
Galaxy S25 Ultra, the AI companion that does the heavy lifting so you can do you. Get yours at Samsung.com. Compatible with select apps. Requires Google Gemini account. Results may vary based on input. Check responses for accuracy.
Every day, thousands of Comcast engineers and technologists, like Kunle, put people at the heart of everything they create.
In the average household, there are dozens of connected devices. Here in the Comcast family, we're building an integrated in-home Wi-Fi solution for millions of families like my own. It brings people together in meaningful ways.
Kunle and his team are building a Wi-Fi experience that connects 1 billion devices every year. Learn more about how Comcast is redefining the future of connectivity at comcastcorporation.com/Wi-Fi.
Please feel free to write me at texashistorylessons@gmail.com. The theme music is graciously provided to me by the great musical artist Derek McClendon. Please go listen to his songs anywhere you listen to music. And that is a pretty perfect way to end it. But I want to add one more thing. And I stumbled across this in preparation for this episode. And it's from a poet I'd never heard of named Paul Laurence Dunbar. And he was born in 1872 to a couple that had been enslaved. And he ended his time on our earth in 1906. And let his words be the last words of this episode. And the poem is called Beyond the Years. Beyond the years the answer lies. Beyond where brood the grieving skies and night drops tears. Where faith rod chastened smiles to rise and doff its fears. And carping sorrow pines and dies beyond the years. Beyond the years the prayer for rest shall beat no more within the breast. The darkness clears, and morn perched on the mountain's crest her form uprears. The day that is come is best beyond the years. Beyond the years, the soul shall find that endless peace for which it pined. For light appears into the eyes that still were blind with blood and tears. Their sight shall come all confined beyond the years. And we'll be back soon with another episode on Texas history and beyond. Take care of yourself. Take care of one another. Be kind. Adios.